My mum has never been that happy about the trajectory of my career path.
And at some point of time, you realize that you fail. So what's your recipe for failure? Yeah,
I'm not qualified to be here. And I came home, I had no job, no money.
We take risk investing in startup. Are they crazy?
That success is the journey. It's how you play the game.
Hi, Ben. Let's give him an applause. But Ben is special. And then let's see a small video that will put us in the mood. Who is Ben? And I mean, what he did and why we should listen.
Ben spent 2 decades leading polar expeditions. He is one of 3 people in history to ski solo to both the North and South Poles, and hold the world record for the longest ever polar journey on foot. In 2004, at age 26, he skied solo to the North Pole, updating his blog each day of the trip. Ben Saunders is also an ambassador for the Prince's Trust, a patron and fellow of British Exploring, a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and an acclaimed keynote speaker, described by TED.
You've spoken to venture capitalists. You've spoken to Sequoia. What do you think when investors say we take risk investing in startup? Are they crazy? They don't understand what kind of risk you've taken. Am I right?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, it's interesting looking back. There've been some big risks over the years, and very little profit at the end of these things. I kind of raised all this money, all this sponsorship, put these teams together, spend years figuring out the logistics and the suppliers and the contractors and all of this stuff, do the expedition, and then all I have at the end of it is a story to tell and some photographs. So that's what I'm going to share with you guys today. I am usually introduced as a polar explorer, which is a pretty weird job title. It's not a job that my careers advisor at school ever mentioned as an option when I was a teenager. And that is probably because there are only 2 poles to explore, North Pole, South Pole. They were both discovered. There are no people, no businesses, no startups, nothing to invest in. So what the hell does this qualify me to talk to you about this evening? Well, this is a good question. And my hope is not that I inspire you to start looking on eBay tomorrow for a pair of skis and a sledge and a big pair of boots and a tent and start planning anything absurd like your own expedition to the Arctic or Antarctica. But rather, my hope is that my story might be food for thought when it comes to the journeys you are all on individually. As Arkady said already, it's a story about taking risk and getting things done in some of the most challenging environments on the planet. It's a story of success, failure, taking chances, kind of figuring things out along the way, going from vision to execution, getting stuff done in difficult, fast-changing, unpredictable environment. If there was no risk in investing, then everybody would be billionaires, clearly. There we go. You might recognize this is Antarctica. So this journey started in October 2013 and finished in February the next year. So it was nearly 4 months long. And hopefully, oh gosh, my screen's so small I can't see if you can see that red line on the map. So we started from the bottom of this red line, the sort of New Zealand side of Antarctica, walked all the way to the top of the red line, South Pole, turned around, walked back to the coast again. And I hope this will give you an idea of scale. There we go. The total round trip was, well, my GPS said 1,795 miles, statute miles. So nearly 2,900 kilometers. Now, if you learn nothing else from me in the next 45 minutes, you might at least learn this, because I didn't know this. I had an email from a scientist after I made it home to the UK who said, well, Ben, you realize surely that number is almost undoubtedly wrong. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, GPS assumes the Earth is a perfect sphere, which it's not. It's actually squashed a bit at the top and bottom. So he reckoned we had walked 6 miles further, which I was pleased to hear, because that brought it to 1,801 statute miles, nearly 2,900 K, 69 and a bit marathons back to back, except as you saw in the movie, we were not running marathons. We were on the skis, each of us dragging a sledge that was 200 kilos each at the start of this journey. Two explorers just completed a polar expedition that killed everyone the last time it was attempted. Now, my mum has never been that happy about the trajectory of my career path, and the precedent for this journey did not look great. Of the 9 people in history who'd ever attempted to walk from the coast of Antarctica to the South Pole and back, none of them had made it, and 5 had died in the process. So the odds didn't look great. And the last attempt was more than 100 years ago. It was led by this guy, Captain Scott, Robert Falcon Scott. If you haven't heard of Scott, you might have heard of Shackleton, Sir Ernest Shackleton, who was his contemporary, his rival. Between them, they spent more than a decade bashing away, trying to become the first to reach the South Pole. And these expeditions, a century and a bit ago, had, I think, a lot in common with perhaps people flying to Mars in the not too distant future. Back then, they were sailing away from home for 3 years at a time. Each expedition was 3 years. And they had no idea what they'd find when they got there. And Captain Scott's last expedition set sail from the UK in 1910, arrived in Antarctica the next year. He had a huge team they had some horses, Siberian ponies. They had dogs, they had tractors, loads of men dragging tons of supplies, creating this supply chain of depots stretching out towards the South Pole. Captain Scott's final team of 5 arrived at the South Pole in January 1912 to find, to their horror, that they had been beaten to it. There was a flag already flying at the South Pole. Now, some of you might know the story. So the Norwegians started with 53 dogs and finished with 11. They were shooting dogs en route and feeding the dogs to the other dogs. Scott's team had never expected to be in a race. They thought they'd be there alone. And there they are at the South Pole in second place, pretty bitter, pretty demoralized. Turned around, started walking nearly 1,500 kilometers back to the coast of Antarctica, and none of them made it. All 5 died on the return leg of that journey in 1912. And the last 3 to die, including Captain Scott, the leader, who is second from the left, as you look at this with the goggles on his head, the last 3 to die had covered nearly 1,600 miles, which is a record that stood until 2014, when Tark and I finally finished our journey in Antarctica. So to me, for years, it seemed extraordinary that the high watermark, of sheer human endeavor and endurance and bravery and risk in the toughest place on earth, that bar had been set so high in 1912 that no one had raised it. No one had finished this journey. No one had ever walked further than that in Antarctica. So we started from exactly the same place, because Captain Scott's wooden hut that they built in 1910, 1911, somewhere around there, is still standing on the shore of Ross Island, very edge of Antarctica. And we had about 20 minutes inside the hut to look around, and it is an extraordinary place. This is Captain Scott's bed. That's a sleeping bag made of reindeer skin, a pair of socks hanging up. The table is still laid, the kettle on the stove. It looked and felt like Scott and his men left a few minutes ago. Now, this was my 11th big expedition. I'd already been doing this for more than 15 years, so I was a professional. This was not my first rodeo, but I still felt completely out of my depth in that moment. I remember thinking, hang on a minute, this is the journey that defeated Shackleton, killed Captain Scott. They're 2 of the biggest icons, 2 of the biggest brand names in my world. No one else has attempted this in 100 years. None of the contemporary greats have tried this. Why is that? Why didn't I listen to all of the experts for years who were telling me why this was impossible? What the hell am I doing here? So I think people often assume that I'm wired differently. I don't experience fear or self-doubt. That is not the case. At this moment, I was terrified.
Imagine, startup accelerator will be opened in this Captain spot, and startuppers are sent there to check their stamina. Do you think the strengths of the teams will go up or down? What do you think?
It's interesting. I've spoken to a lot of businesses, a lot of startups, a lot of VC funds over the years, and I think when I was maybe 16, 17, 18, I'm sure I said at some point, I don't want to be a businessman. Boring. Like, I want to be an adventurer. And I look back on my entire career, it's been business all the way. And the entrepreneurs that I feel most affinity with, the most parallels with, are founders. And I think in many ways they are the modern day explorers, for sure.
Could you remind us what's at stake in Antarctica? Why such kind of pain? What are you looking there? Gold, diamonds, oil, artificial intelligence, a hole to a new space. What's there hidden, please?
Yeah, not much at all, if I'm honest. I mean, to me, the appeal, I've said I'm not an explorer, really. We weren't drawing maps. We weren't naming mountains or glaciers. That's all been done. But if anything, I, for years, saw myself as a peculiar sort of athlete, professional athlete. To me, this was the ultimate, ultra marathon in the toughest place on earth. And as I said just now, to me, it just seemed incredible that no one had finished this journey. This was, one of the most audacious expeditions of human history without leaving the atmosphere, and it hadn't been finished yet. So that was a big part of the appeal. It was something that hadn't been done, and it was an opportunity to, I guess, test myself, challenge myself, not just in the 4 months that it took to do the expedition, but in the decade it took to organize it and to fundraise it and to organize the team. So we started our journey by crossing an area called the Ross Ice Shelf, which is the same size as France or California, roughly, except unlike either, there's nothing going on at all. No people, no buildings, no animals, no birds, no insects, no plants, no hills, no valleys, flat ice sheet for 28 days. And that's when the weather's good. When the weather's not so good, you can't see a thing. We had many days of complete whiteout. Sometimes it's fog, cloud, mist. Sometimes it's the wind, blizzard conditions blowing the snow around. So mentally, it became as hard as it was physically, which is pretty hard indeed. And there was a weird paradox in this journey, in that Taka, my teammate, and I spent nearly 4 months in the biggest wilderness on the planet. We saw nothing man-made, no other people, apart from the South Pole, and I'll come on to that. And yet we were living in a space that it would be illegal to keep prisoners in. This tent was our home for 108 nights in a row. And if I tell you that we didn't wash, we didn't have a shower or a bath, obviously. If I tell you we changed our underwear 3 times in 3.5 months, we were sharing a pee bottle in the tent at night, sleeping about that far away from each other. You'll understand when I say we learned a few things about teamwork and communication and sort of human dynamics under pressure. Now, we had to apply the same thinking to our relationship as a team. And if something wasn't working, we had to try and fix it. We had to get it out in the open. And I think that ability to communicate like that, honestly, openly, is vital and a really interesting thing to look for in leaders, in founders, in startups, I think. One of the biggest lessons for me. And then after 61 days, reached the South Pole. Now, Captain Scott wrote in his journal in January 1912, when they reached the South Pole. I mean, sponsorship is the hardest part. It's like, founders trying to find investors, except I don't have shares to sell. I'm just selling them this sort of little slice of my dream. And if it goes well, then we won't die and we might do it. But super high risk, very, very little return guaranteed. Clearly for a Land Rover or an Intel, it was, Intel is around storytelling. They produce and make a product that nobody ever sees. It's inside devices. It's a pretty unglamorous, tiny little gray square. So the interesting thing to them was that if anybody was going to hear about our story in real time, there's zero audience in Antarctica. So everything was being uploaded via satellite through a number of different devices, all of which had Intel processors in them. So for them, it was a nice marketing story. It was about how their technology enabled storytelling, sharing, inspiring, cool stuff going on anywhere on the planet. And then for Land Rover, it was, what car would an Explorer drive? It's kind of a rhetorical question. So they were a big partner for, 11 years, I think. Yeah. But these are expensive camping trips. This project alone, we call it the Scott Expedition, about $2.5 million all in. There we go. So this is heading back. This is where things got really, really tough. Now, we had left on the way out to the pole. We'd buried 10 depots or caches of food and fuel for our cooker so we can melt snow to get water. We buried 10 of these things. We'd left the last one quite a long way from the pole. The weather turned really bad. We basically realized we weren't going to reach this first buried depot before we ran out of food. So we had to halve our rations, the food we had with us, for 8 days. So normally we were eating 6,000 calories a day. We're normally burning more than that because we lost weight during the expedition. But for 8 days, 3,000 meters above sea level on the Antarctic Plateau, we were suddenly eating 3,000 calories a day and potentially burning more like 9,000. So that's a deficit of 6,000 calories for 8 days. It's basically the same as running 2 marathons a day for 8 days without eating anything. So I think the next slide, you can see this is Tarka looking skinny in the tent. I was in a similar state. It's a special occasion because he's changing his underwear. Obviously, didn't happen very often. But you can see the physical condition he was in. I was in much the same way. I lost 22 kilos in 3.5 months. Tucker lost 25 kilos. So we were really at the very, very edge of endurance in every sense of the word. Yeah, so we basically spent the last 2 weeks just fantasizing about food, dreaming. I could picture walking into a restaurant, and it's in a town called Punta Arenas, southern tip of Chile. I knew we'd be landing there on our long journey back to the UK, and it's basically a very cheap Chilean burger restaurant. So for hours, if not days, if not 2 whole weeks, 108 days after we started, we made it back to this pretty unsexy looking finish line. And there is definitely a finish line. So the 2 sledges are still on the ice of the Ross Ice Shelf. And then there's a crack, and Tarka and I in the blue jackets, we're standing on land. That's Ross Island. So Captain Scott's hut is just over that ridge. The people in black and orange are scientists, mostly from New Zealand. They came to clap us over the line. And I'd always imagined that this moment, the achievement of the biggest goal I'd ever set myself, was going to be the most emotional moment of my life. I'd spent years and years and years dreaming of this point. I remember getting to the edge of the ice, taking my skis off, making sure Tarka was right next to me, and we stepped across at exactly the same time, feet on the land. We'd done it. We'd made the longest ever polar journey on foot, the first return journey to the South Pole under our own human motive power, finished the journey that defeated Sir Ernest Shackleton, killed Captain Scott, world record, achieved the biggest goal I'd ever dreamed of, and nothing happened. There was no immediate feeling of triumph or elation, and then rather than my life becoming more awesome, it actually got less awesome for a long time, many months. I was completely burnt out, absolutely shattered, and moreover, the goal, the thing that had been giving me all of this energy, all of this determination, all of this drive, this work ethic, as soon as we achieved it, it was gone. But where am I going with this? 2 things. I think in business, as an investor, for any entrepreneur, like there is no finish line. I don't think for any business, like the goal is to stop, like lights off, turn the servers off, like we're done. As a founder, yes, of course, you might want an exit. As an investor, you might be looking at the same thing. But I made the mistake personally of looking at success, of thinking success was a finish line in the future, a threshold. Things aren't great now, but when I get there, they're going to be awesome. If only I can achieve enough of something, or accumulate enough of something else, one day I'll get there, I'll have done it, I'll have made it, succeeded, life's going to be great. And it didn't work out that way. If you asked me before this expedition how I define success, I would say, well, success equals achieving your goal. And I think self-belief it's a human quality that we're all born with to some degree. It's maybe a bit like physical strength. Some people naturally just seem to be stronger or to have more endurance than other people. But crucially, like both those things, if you want to, you can make them stronger. They're human qualities that respond to stimulus. Now, if self-belief is important in success, especially as an investor, as a seed investor, when you are taking risks the whole time and they're not all going to work out. So you have to believe in yourself. How do you make it stronger? In my experience, the stimulus it responds to is not success or failure. It's endeavor. It's courage. I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, I shouldn't act. I shouldn't do this deal. I shouldn't invest until I'm more confident. But confidence only ever follows courage. You can't learn to swim by reading a book about swimming. Now, yes, of course, it makes sense to do your research and do as much preparation as you can. But at some point, you have to get in the water. And it's the same with investing. It's the same with any worthwhile endeavor in life. There has to be an element of risk and challenge. Otherwise, there would be no reward. So I think the trick is continually acting without certainty. It's having the courage to, I think it was Nelson Mandela said, I'm either winning or learning. And I think that is the mindset that you need to keep. So that was pretty much my last point.
I was wondering that you mentioned that was so much wind all the time. Did you consider using a kite or a sail to take benefit of the wind?
Yeah, very, very good question. I have a number of friends who've done some extraordinary expeditions, both in Greenland and in Antarctica, using kites. And the technology has come a long, long way, even in the last decade. And to my mind, they are now, it's almost like comparing sailing and rowing completely. And I mentioned my approach as an athlete. I was interested in the sort of human performance side of this. So I decided years ago that I wanted to do expeditions on foot first, and then maybe do some kiting in the future. So perhaps in the next few years, I'd love to do some kite trips. So they're very different disciplines, and kites now very powerful, very high speeds involved, a huge amount of skill and knowledge. So it's just a different thing. And I think also I decided if I'd experienced using a kite, and you can cover hundreds of kilometers in a day now with a kite, I would never want to go back to dragging my own sledge, doing maybe 30 kilometers in a day.
Your Excellency, should I say? Look, I'm also in extreme sports. I used to be in extreme sports and in the mountain climbing, and I would like to ask for your vision on one thing, So when you head for something really important, you have a target, a name, and you fail. And at some point of time, you realize that you fail. So what's your recipe for failure? Yeah. So how would you tackle the failure thing? Because I can tell you, once I was trying to make a summit in Caucasus Mountains, and I couldn't do it, and it was such a disappointment. But I would like to hear your thoughts about it, because you have much more experience in that. So how to manage that? This feeling, when shit, you cannot do anything about it anymore. Yeah. So how would you do that?
I've been there many times. So I think looking back, in some ways, I my entire career, I've had more failed expeditions than I've had successful ones. And I think that's been because I've always been trying to do, pioneering things. I've always been trying to raise the bar. And of course, I'm doing these things in environments where almost all of the crucial variables are outside my control. For me, obviously, it's the environment. It's the temperature, the wind, the visibility, the snow and ice conditions. I can't control those. And actually, as a little tangent, there was a big lesson there about focus and about energy. These expeditions ultimately are exercises in efficiency. It's an equation. It's distance, calories, time, energy, physical energy, sleep, recovery. So trying to juggle those things. And I realized very quickly that if I was investing my energy, my bandwidth, my focus on things I couldn't change, that was a waste of my energy, and that was detracting from my chance of success. So I guess the little takeaway there is to control the controllables. Understand the difference between things you can change and things you can't change, and try and focus only on the things that you can change. I think in business and in life. But in terms of failure, you know, my very first expedition, 2001, I was 23 years old. We were trying to get from Russia, Severnaye Zemlya, a chain of islands off the very north coast of Siberia, incredibly remote place. We were trying to, two of us, I was with a British guy called Penn, strangely, Penn and Ben. He was about 12 years, 13 years older than me. He was my mentor really on that first expedition. We were trying to get from the north coast of the northernmost island off the top of Siberia to the North Pole, which is about 1,000 kilometers over pack ice, you know, walking over the floating surface of the Arctic Ocean. And we didn't get there. We got 2/3 of the way there. And I came home 23 years old. I was absolutely convinced we were going to achieve this. I had absolute belief, absolute conviction we were going to be successful. And I came home in shock at how hard this has been and how crushed I felt. You know, this was the biggest thing. At that point, I had no idea it could become a career. I just thought this was a chance of a lifetime to try to ski to the North Pole. I'm 23, incredible. And we failed. And I came home, I had no job, you know, no money, didn't know what to do, feeling like physically, mentally, completely beaten. And then I opened a letter in the post one day, and it was from a lawyer working for Penn's business. And it was basically, it was a letter with an invoice for my half of the remaining costs because we'd gone over our budget. And it was basically an invoice for nearly £35,000, about $50,000 back then. I had no money. My parents didn't have any money. I didn't have a job. 23, I didn't have a degree. I remember thinking, shit, how am I going to fix this? And I eventually concluded that the best way, the only way I could see of paying off this debt and fixing the problems I'd ended up in was by doing another expedition.
My question is about fears. I would imagine that during your journey, there was some moment in which you were thinking to get something wrong. And how did you overcome this? How did you make this, not thinking about this, bad situation you could find yourself eventually?
Natalie, thank you. But very good question. Yeah, I mentioned fear early on. You know, standing in Captain Scott's hut. You know, suddenly thinking, "Oh, wow, what am I doing here?" And that has been a constant theme. Every big expedition, there are always moments of fear, and often at the very start. You know, when I skied solo to the North Pole, 2004, I was on my own for 72 days, 10 weeks. I was 26. You know, dropped by helicopter again, north coast of Siberia, and absolutely terrified. And even I mentioned Antarctic logistics and some business deals I was looking at 3-4 years ago. And I remember sitting in a boardroom in London, looking at raising some investment to buy into one of these big private companies that operates. This one operated out of Chile and was working, you know, aviation and logistics in Antarctica. One of the owners was retiring. I was interested in buying his stake. It was several $1 million. It was a huge deal. And I had, we had his lawyers and tax advisors, and I had lawyers and a few other sort of advisors. And one of the lawyers used a term that I'd never heard. I just didn't know what he was talking about. And I suddenly had that same feeling, like I'm an imposter. I shouldn't be here. I'm sat at this boardroom table because I'm good at dragging a sledge around. And somehow I've ended up here. And any minute now, someone's going to call me out and realize I'm a complete fraud. I'm not qualified to be here. And the way I deal with fear, with that imposter syndrome, that feeling of being out of my depth, is to try to reframe it and try to remember that feeling has been part of an inevitable part of every big thing I've ever achieved. And I see that I still experience fear now, for sure, if I'm in new situations or trying to do challenging things. But I try to look at that feeling now, not as a sign that I'm in the wrong place and I shouldn't be here, but the reverse, as a sign that I'm in absolutely the right place. And whatever happens next, Like, I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow. Like, this is a pivotal moment. This is challenge. Like, this is what we need to grow. So I try, and it's really hard, but I try to reframe it and look at fear actually as a positive sign that I'm pushing myself and I'm getting close to my limits. So I think it's inevitable when you're doing difficult, challenging things and you're taking risks. I think if I didn't feel fear, I'd be worried. There'd be something wrong, I think, in my head. I'm sure there's plenty going wrong already up there, but I try to look at it as a positive thing now, and an indicator that I'm in the right place.
Your speech about success.
So to me now, success. I used to think of it as success equals achieving your goal. I used to focus on the outcome. I think now, to me, success is continuing to strive to work well, continuing to challenge myself, test myself, take risks, learn new things, experience new things. I think I used to believe that success was a destination, was a finish line. Now I realize that success is the journey. It's how you play the game. And when I set my own goals these days, I try to think of, and I forget where I heard about this a couple of years ago, the idea of infinite focus. Rather than saying, this year I want to invest X amount or make X amount of revenue, the idea of infinite focus to say, I want to build the best business I can. I want to be the best investor I can, because there's no finish line. It's a journey, and you can keep getting better at it.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Let's give an applause to Ben. Ben, our invitation to meet next year in Zurich, in Barcelona, or especially in Tel Aviv.
Do you
and
know,
wish
I haven't,
a happy New Year and Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Yeah, you too. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you. I've never actually been to. I love Barcelona, love Zurich. Never been to Tel Aviv, so maybe we can make that happen. But it was a real joy. Thank you, Arkady. Take
Bye.
care, everyone. Have a fun evening. Bye bye.
Fantastic.